There's a kind of love that masquerades as affection, but it's actually poison. It's a type of love that society celebrates, that neighbors praise, that grandmothers admire, but inwardly, it's destroying a child's soul. Carl Jung spent decades studying how seemingly normal families produce narcissists, and he discovered something disturbing. Narcissism isn't born from parents who hate their children. It's born from parents who love in a specific way. A way that looks like love, but is actually emotional predation in disguise. Today I'm going to reveal the 5 types of toxic love that manufacture narcissists. And I need to warn you, you'll probably recognize at least one of them from your own childhood. But before we continue, I need you to understand something fundamental. Jung explained that every child is born with what he called the authentic self, an authentic essence. A personality in formation that needs to be mirrored, validated, recognized. When parents can see this essence and respond to it, the child develops a solid sense of who they are. But when parents can't see the real child, when they see only an extension of themselves, a tool for their own needs, something terrible happens. The child learns that their authentic self isn't acceptable, that to be loved, they need to abandon who they are and become what their parents need them to be. And so the false self is born, the mask, the persona, and so the narcissist is born. Now pay attention, because the first type of toxic love is the most treacherous. Type 1, performance-based approval. This type of love says, I love you when you make me proud. I love you when you get good grades. I love you when you win. I love you when you make me look like a good parent. Emily was 42 years old when she finally understood what had happened to her. She grew up being the perfect daughter, the best student, the best athlete, the one who always won awards. Her parents showed her off at family parties like a trophy. Look what Emily achieved. Look how special Emily is. And Emily learned. She learned that her value wasn't in who she was, but in what she produced. That love wasn't unconditional. Love was a transaction. You give me results, I give you affection. In her 20s, Emily was an achievement machine. Master's degree, promotion, own house, imported car. But inside, she felt an emptiness that no achievement could fill. And that's when the narcissism revealed itself. Emily couldn't have real relationships. She saw people as an audience for her achievements. When someone didn't admire her enough, she discarded them. When someone criticized her, she destroyed them. Jung would call this identification with the persona. Emily no longer knew who she was beneath all the achievements. The authentic self had been murdered in childhood, replaced by a mask of success that she could no longer take off. Emily's parents weren't monsters. They loved their daughter, but their love was conditioned on performance, and this type of love teaches a fundamental lie. You only deserve love when you're exceptional. Being normal, being human, having flaws, is unacceptable. Children who grow up like this develop what Jung called ego inflation. They need to be special to exist, because if they aren't special, they won't be loved. And if they aren't loved, they die psychologically. But wait, because the second type is even more destructive. Type 2, emotionally contingent love. This type of love says, I love you when you don't bother me. I love you when you don't cry. I love you when you don't express anger. I love you when you're emotionally convenient for me. Michael was 38 years old and had a rage that he didn't know where it came from. He would explode over anything, slamming his fist on the table, yelling at his wife, threatening his co-workers, and then, when the storm passed, he felt guilty and confused. Why am I like this? What's wrong with me? The answer was in his childhood. Michael's father was a man who couldn't tolerate emotions. Boys don't cry. Stop making a scene. You want me to give you a reason to cry? Swallow that crying now." And Michael swallowed. He swallowed every tear. He swallowed every fear. He swallowed every frustration until there was no more room inside him, and everything that was swallowed turned into a time bomb. Jung explained that repressed emotions don't disappear. They sink into the unconscious and form what he called autonomous complexes. They're like separate personalities living inside you, waiting for the moment to take control. Michael's anger wasn't his. It was the anger of the 6-year-old boy who was never allowed to cry. And now, 32 years later, that boy was exploding through him. But here's the paradox. Michael was also a narcissist. Not the grandiose type like Emily, the vulnerable type. He couldn't tolerate criticism because any criticism activated that ashamed boy. He manipulated emotionally because it was the only way he knew how to get what he needed. He didn't have real empathy because he had never received empathy. Parents who condition love on emotional behavior are telling their children that parts of them are unacceptable. And when parts of you are unacceptable, you can't be a whole person. You can only be a fragment, an edited version, a persona. The third type of love is especially cruel because it seems like the opposite. Type 3, love based on being the antithesis of the parents. This type of love says, "I love you because you're going to be everything I wasn't. I love you because you're going to realize my unlived dreams. I love you because through you, I'm going to fix my own life." Ethan was 48 years old and had never cried in front of anyone. His father was a man who cried over anything, who apologized for existing, who let everyone walk all over him. Ethan's mother hated her husband for it, and she decided that her son would be different. "You're not going to be weak like your father. You're going to be strong. You're going to be a real man. You're not going to let anyone step on you." And Ethan learned. He learned to never show vulnerability, to never ask for help, to never admit he was wrong, because vulnerability meant being like his father, and being like his father meant losing his mother's love. Jung would call this parental shadow projection. Ethan's mother had parts of herself that she rejected, vulnerable, fragile, needy parts. Instead of integrating those parts, she projected them onto her husband and hated them in him. And then she programmed her son to be the opposite. But the problem is that those vulnerable parts existed in Ethan too. They exist in every human being. And when you're programmed to hate essential parts of yourself, you just can't be a complete person. Ethan became a classic narcissist, controlling, incapable of intimacy, terrified of showing any weakness. He treated others the same way he'd learned to treat himself, with contempt for any sign of humanity. His children grew up afraid of their father. His wife lived walking on eggshells. And Ethan, deep down, felt completely alone. Because how can you have intimacy with someone when half of you is forbidden to exist? But hold on. Because the fourth type might be the most common. Type 4, transactional love. This kind of love says, "I'll give you love in exchange for something." Nothing is free. Everything has a price, even affection. Emily was 37 years old and couldn't receive gifts. Whenever someone gave her something, she immediately thought, "What does this person want from me?" When her boyfriend did something kind, she became suspicious. When a friend offered help, she refused, because she'd learned very early on that love isn't free. In Emily's parents' house, everything was accounted for. "I did this for you. Now you owe me. After everything I've sacrificed, you do this to me. Do you know how much I spent raising you?" Love was a diet, and Emily spent her life trying to pay a bill that never decreased. Carl Jung explained that children need unconditional love to develop a secure sense of self. When love is transactional, The child learns that they have no inherent worth, that they only exist to the extent that they can offer something to others. This creates two types of narcissism. The first is the narcissist who exploits. They've learned that relationships are transactions, so they become a master at extracting value from others without giving anything in return. The second is the inverted narcissist. They've learned that they need to give to deserve love. So they exhaust themselves trying to be useful, but underneath there's a deep anger, a feeling that they're always being used. And when that anger explodes, it's devastating. Emily was the second type. She gave, and then resented. Her relationships were cycles of self-sacrifice, followed by explosions of bitterness, because she'd never learned that she could be loved, just for existing. And now we come to the fifth type, the most subtle, the most invisible, and perhaps the most destructive of all. Type 5, love based on keeping the peace. This type of love says, I love you when you don't cause problems. I love you when you don't make waves. I love you when you disappear. Jessica was 35 years old and felt like she didn't exist. It wasn't a metaphorical feeling. It was literal. She looked in the mirror and couldn't see herself. She walked into a room and felt that no one noticed her presence. She spoke, and the words seemed to have no weight. In Jessica's childhood, the problem was the older brother. He had behavioral issues, outbursts, crises. The parents spent all their emotional energy dealing with him, and Jessica learned to be invisible, to have no needs, to never ask for anything, to occupy the smallest space possible. Because when she tried to have a presence, her mother would say, at least you don't give me trouble. Don't you start too. Being loved meant not existing. Carl Jung called this inverted mystical participation. It's when the child learns that their existence is a burden, that to be accepted, they need to disappear, that the best they can do for the family is to have no needs. Children like this develop what we call covert narcissism. On the outside, they seem like shy, self-effacing, egoless people. But on the inside, there's a ferocious hunger for recognition, a deep anger for having been ignored. And when that anger finds a way out, it's usually through passive-aggressive manipulation, chronic victimhood, or relationships where they can finally control someone. Jessica spent years in relationships where she was the savior. She chose problematic partners because with them, she could finally exist. She was needed. She had a function, but the price was high. She emptied herself, completing others. These are the 5 types of love that manufacture narcissists. Performance-based approval, emotionally contingent love, love based on being the antithesis of the parents, transactional love, love based on keeping the peace. And here's the most painful part. None of the parents in these stories was cruel on purpose. None of them woke up thinking, today I'm going to destroy my child. They loved their children. They truly loved them, but their love was contaminated by their own unresolved traumas, by their own unintegrated shadow, by their own complexes that were never treated. Carl Jung said that parents don't just transmit genes to their children, they transmit complexes, unconscious psychological patterns that pass from generation to generation like an invisible inheritance. Emily inherited the need for performance because her parents inherited it from their parents. Michael inherited the emotional repression that came from generations of men who could never cry. Ethan inherited the shadow projection that his mother had inherited from her mother. And if you're watching this and recognizing your own childhood, I need to tell you something important. You are not to blame. The child you were did what they needed to do to survive. The false self you developed wasn't a choice. It was an adaptation, a defense mechanism. The only way you found to get love in an environment that didn't offer unconditional love, but now you're an adult, and now you have a choice. You can continue living on autopilot, repeating patterns you don't even know you have, or you can do the work of looking inward, of recognizing what was done to you, of integrating the parts of yourself that were exiled. Carl Jung called this process individuation. It's the journey of becoming who you really are, of recovering the authentic self that was buried under layers of the false self or the mask. It's not easy, it's not fast, and it usually requires professional help, but it's possible. And I need to show you what happens when someone decides to do this work. Teresa was 51 years old when she finally understood why she could never maintain relationships. She had spent her whole life in a cycle. She met someone, fell intensely in love, gave everything of herself, and then, when the other person showed any human flaw, Teresa felt a devastating disappointment, a contempt that came from a place she didn't understand. It was only in Jungian therapy that she was able to connect the dots. Teresa's mother practiced the first and fourth types of toxic love, performance-based approval combined with transactional love. Teresa only received attention when she shined. And everything she received came with a price. When Emily was a child, she learned to be exceptional. But she also learned that people only exist to give you something, that relationships are transactions, that no one truly loves you. They only use you while you're useful. And this lesson shaped her entire life. She chose partners who seemed perfect at first, because she needed perfection. She couldn't love real humans with real flaws because she had learned that flaws mean a loss of value. And when the partners inevitably showed their humanity, Emily discarded them with the same coldness she had felt as a child. Emily's individuation work lasted years, not weeks, years. First, she had to recognize what had happened, and that was painful, because it meant admitting that her parents' love had been conditional, that she had never been loved simply for existing. Then she had to grieve, cry for the child who was never allowed to be imperfect, feel the anger she had repressed her entire life, let emerge the despair that was buried under decades of false self. And then came the hardest part. She had to learn to reparent herself. Jung didn't use that term, but the concept is present in his work. Reparenting is the process of giving yourself what your parents couldn't give, and learning to look in the mirror and say, "You have value, even when you fail. You deserve love, even when you're not exceptional. You are enough, just for existing." Emily practiced this every day. In the beginning, it seemed fake. The words had no weight, but over time, something began to change. She began to be able to tolerate imperfection in others and in herself. She began to have relationships where she could be vulnerable, where she could show weakness without fear of being discarded. Today, at 58 years old, Emily has been in a relationship for 7 years, the longest of her life. And what she values most is not that her partner is perfect. It's that she finally manages to love someone real, flaws and all. But I know what you're thinking. Does this work for everyone? The honest answer is no. Some patterns are so deep that they require intensive intervention. Some traumas are so severe that the person needs years of work before seeing any change. And some people simply aren't ready to do that work. But what I can guarantee you is this. If you're watching this video this far, you've already taken the first step. Awareness is the beginning of everything. Before you can change a pattern, you need to be able to see it. And now you can see it. You know what performance-based approval is. You know what transactional love is. You know what happens when a child learns that parts of them are unacceptable. This knowledge doesn't automatically cure you, but it opens a door. And walking through that door is a choice that only you can make. Now, I need to talk about something that few therapists mention. The 5 types of toxic love that I've described don't exist in isolation. In most dysfunctional families, they combine, they mix, they reinforce each other. A mother might practice performance-based approval along with emotionally contingent love. You are only loved when you deliver results and when you don't demonstrate negative emotions about the pressure of delivering results. A father might practice transactional love along with love based on being the antithesis of the parent. You owe me everything I've done for you, and you have to be the man I never was. These combinations create what Jung called complexes. They are autonomous psychological patterns that operate outside of consciousness. And the more types of toxic love a child receives, the more complexes they develop, and the harder the individuation work becomes. Because it's not enough to identify one pattern. You need to dismantle an entire web of interconnected patterns. And here is something that maybe you don't want to hear. If you grew up in a family that practiced these types of love, there is a high probability that you are repeating these patterns, not because you're a bad person, but because unconscious patterns are transmitted. Jung called this psychic inheritance. We inherit not only the traumas of our parents, but also the defenses they developed against those traumas. And if you have children, this is an urgent reflection, because while you're reading books about positive parenting and striving not to repeat the obvious mistakes of your parents, the subtle patterns are passing unnoticed. You may be practicing performance-based approval, thinking you're just encouraging your child. You may be practicing emotionally contingent love, thinking you're just teaching emotional regulation. You may be practicing transactional love, thinking you're just teaching responsibility. The difference is subtle, but it's crucial. Unconditional love doesn't mean absence of limits. It doesn't mean letting the child do whatever they want. It doesn't mean never correcting. Unconditional love means that the correction doesn't threaten the bond. It means that the child knows that even when they do wrong, even when they fail, even when they disappoint, they are still loved. They still have value. They still belong. And it's that security that allows the authentic self to develop. And it's the absence of that security that forces the child to develop a false self or a mask. If you're watching this and recognizing patterns in the way you're raising your children, don't panic and don't give in to guilt. Guilt is paralyzing. Awareness is liberating. The fact that you can see the pattern means that you can start to change it. Not all at once, not perfectly, but gradually, consciously, deliberately. Each moment of real connection that you offer your child is a brick in the foundation of their authentic self. Each time you look at them and see who they really are, not who you want them to be, you're offering the mirroring that forms healthy identities. And even if you mess up, even if you fall into old patterns, you can repair, you can acknowledge, you can apologize. That's also mirroring. It's a way of saying to your child, even adults fail, and it's okay to fail. What matters is recognizing and fixing it. Now, I need to take a pause and speak directly to you. If you've come this far, you're not a casual person. You are seeking something, understanding, healing, maybe validation for pains that were never acknowledged. And I know that this kind of content is hard to find. Most channels about narcissism focus on demonizing the narcissists, on teaching you to protect yourself from them, on creating a clear division between us, the victims, and them, the monsters. But Jung taught us something different. Carl Jung taught us that the shadow we see in others is often a reflection of the shadow we're unwilling to see in ourselves. That the narcissists who wound us so deeply were themselves wounded children first. The cycle of pain only breaks when someone has the courage to look inward. This channel exists to offer that perspective, to go beyond the superficial, to touch on truths that most people would rather avoid. And maintaining this work requires resources. The super thanks button down there is your way of saying, this content is important. Keep going. Each contribution is a vote of confidence and an affirmation that there are people willing to do the deep work, to look into the shadows, to break cycles. If you can contribute, I genuinely appreciate it. And if you can't, that's perfectly fine. Sharing this video with someone who needs to hear this is already a powerful way to help. Now let's get back to the content. I've talked about the 5 types of toxic love. I've talked about how they combine. I've talked about generational transmission and about the possibility of healing. But I haven't talked about one thing yet. What happens when you confront your parents? Because at some point in the journey of individuation, this question arises. Should I talk to them? Should I tell them what I've discovered? Would that help? The answer is complicated. For some people, confrontation is necessary. It's a way to reclaim their own voice, to say out loud what has always been silenced, to break the spell of the family secret. It is to break the cycle of abuse. But for other people, confrontation doesn't help. Parents who practice toxic love often can't hear. They deny, they minimize, they turn the tables and play the victim. And what was supposed to be a moment of healing becomes just another trauma. Jung would say that true healing doesn't depend on the response of the parents. It happens internally. It's the process of integrating the exiled parts of yourself, of acknowledging the wound, of grieving, of reparenting yourself. If the parents can participate in that process, great. If they can't, the process continues anyway. Individuation isn't about fixing others. It's about becoming whole. And here's the final piece I need to share. If you recognized your childhood in the 5 types of toxic love, you're probably feeling a mixture of emotions right now. Relief at finally having words for what you experienced. Anger at what was done to you. Sadness for the child you were. Fear that you might be repeating the same patterns. All of these emotions are valid. All of them belong to you. Don't try to suppress them or rush the process. What you can do now is simple. Observe. Observe when you're seeking approval instead of connection. Observe when you're repressing emotions to be accepted. Observe when you're treating relationships like transactions. Observe when you're trying to disappear so you don't bother anyone. Just observe. Without judgment, without rushing to change, because observation is the first step of integration. And over time, observation becomes choice. You start to notice the pattern the moment it happens. And in that moment, you can choose to do differently. It won't work every time. Patterns of decades don't disappear in weeks. But each time you choose consciously, you're strengthening a new neural pathway. You're weakening the power of the autonomous complex. You're getting closer to your authentic self. Jung said that individuation isn't a destination, it's a journey that lasts a lifetime. And if you're on that journey, you are not alone. Now tell me in the comments, which of the 5 types of love did you recognize in your childhood? Write the number 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. And if you feel comfortable, tell a little bit of your story, because each person who shares is helping another person feel less alone, is validating experiences that were denied, is breaking the silence that keeps these patterns alive. And if you don't want to share publicly, that's okay. Keep this knowledge to yourself. Use it on your personal journey. The important thing is that now you know, and knowing is the first step to change.